When we start talking about chattel slavery, we're not talking about one trauma. We're not talking about a specific event. We're talking about generations of trauma with no intervention. Based on what I know about sugar plantations, tobacco, the Caribbean, what I know about American chattel slavery and the plantations there, does anyone right now ever recall mental health assistance to slaves? Anybody remember sending in the therapist after I sold off your son, daughter, raped folks? At any point? Never. Second question. After slavery was officially over, now you're free. Anybody remember any therapy then? We know it's been rough, it's been deep for you, it's been difficult. We're going to do a little group therapy. Anybody remember that? That would be no. Number 3, after slavery officially ended, both in the States, in the Caribbean, the British ended, do you remember whether or not trauma continued? Did the trauma continue for people of African descent? I need to know. Okay, so now let's do the math. Hundreds of years of trauma, no treatment. Freed, more trauma, no treatment. What do you do the math? Do you think there may be residual impacts of that trauma? Of course there is. It didn't end, friends, and it hasn't ended yet. So I think on one point, African people and people of African descent are extremely resilient. Matter of fact, I think we're a miracle. Far be it for us to pathologize or to look and cast this idea of weak and sick people. Oh, on the contrary, I'm profoundly resilient because we've done everything we've done thus far with no help, with not even the ability to have this discussion. As though it were possible, we escaped injury in all those hundreds of years and the years that follow. So this kind of journey I'm going to take you on is going to be one that really gives a perspective on what this trauma was, what it looks like, and clinically, what is post-traumatic stress disorder? What does it look like? Now, let me give you a little snapshot. We'll get into it in more depth a little later. But post-traumatic stress disorder, if in fact you are diagnosed with that, again, remember, direct or indirect trauma, here are some of the symptoms.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Did you know that trauma can leave a biological imprint to the descendants of the traumatized people, affecting how they behave during adversity or how they behave during certain things that makes them really uncomfortable? What am I talking about? Join me today in this presentation that we are going to look at post-traumatic slave syndrome that was talked about by Dr. Joy DeGrave. It's really important that this is a topic that we need to talk about because mostly it has often been overlooked. It has often been dismissed by a number of people. Some people saying that it is just like a normal trauma. And, the study of epigenetics describe this issue of how trauma can be passed genetically, its imprint, how it restains or how it stains on the genes and how it's being passed to the coming generation. Really important if you really get to learn or really get to see how this really happens. And the post-traumatic slave syndrome is something that has been happening to people in the United States, especially Black people in the United States. And now we are having people like Professor Joy DeGrave. She's trying to talk about this, and it's important that she lays an opinion, which is really important amongst other things that we need to talk about. So this is a theory, PTSS, that is the post-traumatic slave syndrome, which was developed by Dr. Joy DeGrave to explain multi-generational trauma experienced by Black Americans as a result of slavery, the systemic issues which has been happening. So the PTSS, that the post-traumatic slave syndrome, proposes that psychological wounds inflicted during slavery were passed down from generation to generation, impacting the descendants of enslaved Africans in profound ways. This is really important. Actually, it explains a number of things. And you hear people saying that, black people, they have temper. Black people dealing with things like getting overwhelmed, getting sad so easily, getting so squeamish so easily. This explains a number of things, and most of us, according to epigenetics, most of us are going just through this, what our descendant left, and just waking up in the morning hearing that your great great grandfather, they did to them something like that, makes you really really sad. And so this is a most important topic that I feel like we need to talk about, because it talks about the deep psychological scars that we black people have been having, we black people have gone through. So this is really really important, and I want us to watch this video because it's so eye opening. And generally, this is a video that every person, regardless of the class that you come from, we need to learn, and we need to understand things. We need to understand the etiology of all these things, of how we behave sometimes are as a result of things which happened. You might be having a baby, but you realize that there are some things that they're doing, and you try to kind of don't understand what's happening. So there is a biological imprint, which explains why also trauma can be passed from one generation to another. And I support this as a social science student who have looked at trauma, or who have understood the psychological impact of trauma and what it can cause to people. It can be you might be traumatized passively when you add the stories of slave and how things happened. Also, you can get traumatized actively. Maybe you observed, or maybe you participated in one. So and one thing that I like you to know, that trauma doesn't only go to the person who the trauma itself has been done to them, but it also goes to the perpetrator. What do I mean? I mean that we also have white people, especially, who are traumatized by the stories that they add from the black people, right? So I don't want to say much. My request is just that if you're watching this video for the first time, I'll ask you to subscribe the channel. I'll ask you to, join my membership and really get to see what I can offer you, because I believe that it's important that you help me so that we can all get educated. And if you have a person who is like-minded like you and would like to share this message together, let's share the message, like the video, and subscribe to the channel, join the membership, really get to see what we can offer you. Until then, let's dive right into the video. I'm sorry for taking you long.
A feeling of foreshortened future. Now, what does that mean? A feeling, well, you're not going to live long. How many of you are running into young people that don't believe they're going to make it past their 20s? Feeling of foreshortened future, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, difficulty falling or staying asleep, hypervigilance, right? These are symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is like DSM stuff, Diagnostic Statistical Manual Mental Disorders. It's in there. And there's a whole listing of all these symptoms. Now, I want to roll it back so you can understand what the transmission theory is, because I'm going to talk about transmission. So how does a person that's been traumatized by post-traumatic, literally has a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, and can we, if we are logical and we are reasonable people, assume that a fair number of Africans had to have had post-traumatic stress disorder? You think? I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about them. Untreated, though, right? Okay, so now let's do the math. Mom, who saw dad sold or sister raped, has post-traumatic stress disorder. Still mom, though, right? Only mom now has outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future, difficulty falling or staying asleep, hypervigilance. That would be mom. Now, Johnny or Mary or Shaquisha did not have the original trauma. But what are they learning? This is called social learning theory. What am I normalizing? Exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger. Are you following me? So I didn't have to be traumatized. Now, the other thing is, do you think Johnny and Mary got traumatized too? Do you see? So what happens in your environment, you learn from the significant others in your environment. And if they're broken, guess what you're going to be? You're learning from broken people. And you're normalizing that behavior. And then it becomes, years later, 2008, that's their culture. That's just the way they are. That's their culture. So there's poison in the cookies, right? But how are you going to tease out that poison? That means you have to look at the etiology of the behavior, which is what I spent many years doing. And it's not rocket science. This is not deep. Like I said, this is not required that, someone has, it's just common sense. How many of you in the room think you can cook? Come on now. I know it's a strange place. You all have the oddest food in the world. I'm trying to tell you that now. Those of you that know how to cook, who taught you how to cook? Mom, dad, family. Who you think taught them? Hello, social learning theory. You learn from those in your environment. And if they couldn't cook, the likelihood is you can't either. Okay. So there's things that we don't question them. This is what goes in the curry. What are you talking about? This is how you make curry. Well, how you know? Because that's the way my mother made it. Well, maybe, she didn't get the recipe right. Actually, I wrote Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, the book, which is here. The book is called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. I recently have written a study guide, which is being edited now. But the reason why I wrote the book is really to put a name to what I was looking at. I started to look at behaviors in African people and people of African descent. A long time, people ask me all the time, I just was interviewed by ABC, and they wanted to know, where did this come from? It came from growing up black. No, there's nothing deep there. I grew up looking at black folks and wondering why we behaved the way we did. Very little had to do with white people. Very little. I was looking at black people, and I wanted to understand our behavior. I am 50 years old, and I remember looking at people who were, growing up in South Central Los Angeles. That's where I grew up. My parents are from the South, from Louisiana, and from Belize. And one of the things that I started to notice are certain behaviors that black people engaged in that I started realizing, not just African Americans, African Caribbean people. I came here, heard the same thing. Behaviors around what we look like. Like, for example, I would hear people, and most people here, white or black or wherever you are in the spectrum, you've seen the behavior and wondered about it. I know you have, because I wondered about it.
So according to Dr. Joy DeGraaf-Lehr, she says that, the PTSD, that is the post-traumatic slave syndrome, is built on the premise that the horrors of slavery, for example, forced labor, family separation, psychological and physical abuse, left deep psychological scars on enslaved people. The trauma of those experiences did not end with emancipation, but continued through systemic racism, segregation, and discrimination, which have remained embedded in societal structures. Now, Dr. Joy DeGraaf, she argues that the unsolved trauma manifests in behaviors, emotional responses, and social patterns among enslaved African descendants. So there is a pattern, especially for the unsolved, for the unsolved trauma. And this reflects in the way they react, or in the way some of us react here. And you might be saying that, it's happening only to black people in America. Yes, majority of it's happening to black people in America. But trust me, if we have Africans who really understand the impact of slavery and its influence, or how it shaped how people looked into things, or how it shaped on how people perceive things, it's really, really important for them to understand that trauma can also get them. And if the trauma gets the oppressor, why not some Africans, that some of our ancestors also participated in selling some of their brothers and sisters through different ways, and they exchanged them for things like, watches, guns, name all of them, right? So those are the reasons why they exchange them. And there is some important symptoms that Dr. Led Graf shares, which I want us to talk about. You know, we have internalized oppression. Now, black individuals may adopt negative stereotypes and beliefs about themselves due to centuries of dehumanizing treatment. They might develop negative stereotypes. Sometimes usually talk about the self-hate in the black community. Why do we hate ourselves, and why don't we feel the same about ourselves? And it takes a lot from people to understand this. Why don't we love ourselves? That's a question that we also need to understand. So let's continue watching the video. I'll be back with other core symptoms of the PTSD that I believe that we need to talk about.
Well, you have black people that aren't black. How many people have met black people that actually aren't black? Now, this is an interesting phenomenon. These are black people that will tell you before, first of all, they certainly look black to me. They look black, but they don't say they're black. I've got quite a bit of Indian in me. Did I mention that a lot of my family are from, all of a sudden there's something else, right? And you're looking going, sure could have fooled me, you look black to me, right? Now, this would be something that I could ignore if it stopped when I was a child in South Central, but it didn't. You could hear it in rap music today. Same behavior. Matter of fact, the rap videos, they just need to clone the same girl, right? I could draw her right now, what she looks like. The little wavy hair, and she's black, but not too black. Okay? And what is that about? What is its etiology, and why does it persist? That means that it's an intracultural phenomenon that's being passed along through generations. But why? What is this self-loathing that I see in contemporary black folks? I'm not going back to slavery. I'm talking about today, who hate and despise the reflection in the mirror. That's what I wanted to know. So that's what led me on my journey, if you will. Again, not an unusual journey. Of course, I'm going to kind of pop back and forth through British history and American history. James Madison was a very important figure in American history, President of the United States, 1751 to 1836. He said, blacks are inhabitants, but as debased by servitude below the equal level of free inhabitants, which regards the slave as divested of 2/5 of the man. This is called the 3/5 compromise. And what they were trying to figure out is, what are we going to do? How are we going to count these black folks? Because, based on how many people you have residing in a particular state, the more representatives you can send to the House of Representatives, and thus the more power that particular state can wield. So the question was, how do you count the slaves? Well, Southerners, who of course enjoyed slavery, they wanted to count them. They said, yeah, count them. That gives us more power. Where the Northerners saw it as an opportunity to abolish slavery, said, well, you can't count them because you don't consider them human. How can you count people who have absolutely no freedom that you do not count or treat as human beings? So the agreed upon solution is to count 3/5 of a state's total slave population. And so as a result, they became 3/5 of a man, divested of that. But it's almost as though you're not talking about a human being anymore. And that's what's scary about this. And I always start my talks by saying that when you see folks dressed up like this, and I know you all see a lot of them, you should get worried. I always get concerned when I see them dressed up like that, like this guy here. This next guy was someone that I struggled with. You all know him, Richard Oswald. He's the son of a Presbyterian minister, international trader of enslaved Africans. What's so deep about this gentleman is how wealthy he became as a result. He would be worth, based on the 1700s, right now he would be worth 68 million. Based on the number of slaves, the slave trade and colonies, ships, all the stuff that he basically utilized. But again, these folks are held in high regard. When I read about him in your history,
another important characteristic of the PTSD, that is post-traumatic slave syndrome, is mistrust of institution. Now listen, historic betrayal such as unequal treatment in healthcare, education, and justice systems have led to general mistrust of the institution. We don't trust nothing. Try put any institution, black people, we won't trust you. It won't be easy for it. I mean, if it's so hard for you to gain the trust of, it's so hard for you to gain the trust of a black person, right? Because we have been in societies where we have systemic issues, where we always have to shed blood for us to get some things, you know. So we've been dealing with unequal treatment. Black people have been dealing with unequal treatment. For example, education. Talk about education, educational disparities. Talk about financial disparities. Talk about health disparities, amongst other things. So the mistrust that we have developed ourselves towards other people. I mean, the perpetrators, the people who does this to people, you know. So it's really hard for us to just trust anybody, just believe in everything that is being presented on us. We ask questions, we evaluate things, we do some background checks. That's how we are, because we have grown. And these are as a result of the unsolved traumas that happened to our ancestors, because they grew in a society where there is a lot of injustices which happened. And so while we also came back to learn the history, to learn generally everything which happened, now we come to see how things really happen. And in as much as this happened in the past, we can still relate some things, you know. If those times it was the Jim Crow, today we're still dealing with the systemic issues. So systemic issues explain why we are having health disparities, why we are having financial disparities, why we are having educational disparities. So these mistrust of these institutions, these are what makes us not to trust anything or anybody. So and also you can realize that it's not only other people but also some people in Africa, right? So this is something which keeps on happening, and it really happens. We need to understand that. So again, I'll be back with another symptom. Let's continue watching the video.
You would never know. Google him. You'd never know the ugly trade that he was engaged in, because we've sanitized it, you see. It all got kind of sanitized. But what's important is to understand the wealth amassed. And see, this is where people get afraid, particularly Europeans. This is where the whole, oh my God, dare I say the big ugly word, most folks are afraid of, because we don't really care too much about the healing. That healing stuff, go on and get better, you people. But don't try to touch the resources. That would be reparations. We don't want to have that conversation. We're okay if you all go heal, however you're going to do that. But let's not talk about the reparations story. But when you start looking at the wealth amassed, and then you got to look at the Church of England. It gets real ugly, because then you start realizing what is a foundation for the Church of England. Folks that blessed the slave ships. And then, of course, and this is interesting about John Newton, because we all know about, the first thing you hear, John Newton, what's the next thing you hear? Amazing Grace. John Newton, Amazing Grace. Well, let's figure out what happened before he got Amazing Grace. He said slaves are lesser creatures without Christian souls, and thus are not destined for the next world. Now, what becomes important about this kind, and you'll see it both in American history as well, there is this kind of dehumanization of African people. Because you got to ask yourself this question: how do people who deem themselves superior, who see themselves as the civilizers, who recognize themselves as what we call manifest destiny, the white man's burden of civilizing all the rest of the races, how do you reconcile being the superior being and engaging in barbaric behavior. What that produces is something called cognitive dissonance. How many people are familiar with that? Cognitive dissonance is really thinking discord. It's when you begin to feel conflict between what you believe or understand or hold to be true, and you are then faced with behaviors, either in yourself or others, that conflict with your fundamental belief. It produces cognitive dissonance. Human beings don't function well with cognitive dissonance. You must remove the cognitive dissonance in order to function. So in order for people to perpetuate slavery and to perpetuate that whole system that lasts for centuries, you had to remove all dissonance associated with it. Can't be anything wrong with me. Certainly isn't us. We're the civilizers. We're the superior. So it must be them. Oh, yes. Well, you see, they don't even have souls. Now I can go to sleep because I'm not really dealing with a human being. Are you following me? Okay, let's see what else he said. He said, when the women and girls are taken on board a ship naked, trembling, terrified, they are often exposed to the wanton rudeness of white savages. The prey is divided upon the spot. Look at the choice of words, the prey. Resistance or refusal would be utterly in vain. And then he says, I sinned with a high hand. Yeah, and then he wrote Amazing Grace. Okay. So it's really important to understand that hand in hand with the behavior was a mindset that is so damaging. You see, I call it the secret. Not the secret that everybody's been talking about, that secret. This secret is the kind that makes you sick. How many people here are in mental health, have done direct mental health treatment with folks? If you've done any, you know that the secrets make us sick, yes? Isn't it the secrets that cause people the pathology? Right? How long have white people had to hold this secret? How long and how many generations had to stop and pretend Grandpa didn't do what he did? That the wealth we enjoy was not on the backs of some of these little girls. Think about how long one had to keep that secret. And the only thing you could do is either pathologize the other. It's all their fault because it certainly wasn't great-granddad. Look how well he dresses. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when I say that this pathology goes hand in hand, I kid you not. Then you have science. And whenever we are in a process of trying to legitimize things, it's so amazing. You know, people always say this to me, even black people, when they hear about post-traumatic. Because you know it's not correct unless you can count it and measure it, right? Science is the final. It is the number one. If you can say it's scientific, then you basically trump everything else, right? Science determines reality. So if we can scientifically assert a thing to be true, then in fact it is true because it's scientifically proven. It's a scientific fact. Matter of fact, that's what people will tell you when you try to say to them, I don't know if I agree with you. You know, it's scientific. It's a scientific fact, what I'm saying here, right? Which somehow makes it what? True. And it's also in a book. Now, let's do the math. It's in a book, and it's scientifically proven. Did anybody here realize that recently we lost a planet? Anybody know what planet we lost? How you lose a planet? You know, I became fond of the little picture with we lost a planet. We didn't lose a planet. You know what it means? Science was wrong. Now, have they ever said, you know, we were wrong about that planet thing? No. It's called a paradigm shift. So let's go to science. And I think it's important that we do. So we go to someone named Carl von Linnaeus. Now, Carl von Linnaeus becomes an important character in this whole conspiracy of silence and legitimacy and removing the dissonance. Carl von Linnaeus developed a system based on a criterion of skin color and laid the basis for 19th century racial classification. Linnaeus properly began the science of anthropology. So here we have the father of anthropology. Although color classification of races dated back to the ancient Egyptians, anthropologists refer to Linnaeus's Systema Naturae of 1735 as the first modern study of man. While Linnaeus advanced classification with his use of a color criterion, he also fixed on his 4 families of man certain moral and intellectual peculiarities that continued into the 19th century anthropological vocabulary. He described Homo Americanus. Who might that be? That would be Native Americans, American Indians. Homo Americanus. And what did he say about them? He said they were reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, and regulated by custom. Homo Europaeus, as white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Homo Asiaticus, that'd be Asians, as sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious, and ruled by opinions. And Homo Afer, as black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. These insights into what Linnaeus defined as racial character, personality traits, behavior, intelligence, language, and a host of other related categories were transmitted into subsequent attempts at a science of classification and became more fixed than the races themselves. Not a shred of science here. But it is in a book. And it's touted as science. And what's more important, you know, my students, I teach graduate students in social work. And they'll say, but Dr. Leary, my God, we're looking at 1707 to 1778. We are, right? After all. But do you not hear these same attributions today? You know, those blacks, they're lazy, you know, all of the exact same, am I telling the truth? In your newspapers, in your accounts of them, do you not hear these very same things? So does it matter that it started in 1707 and 1778 and has no scientific merit? That's multi-generational, is it not? It's being passed along. Part of the swallowing into the social gullet. Those are the beliefs, you see. So it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. And thank you, Carl von Linnaeus. Again, he's removing the cognitive what? Don't they deserve to be treated the way we treat them? Have we not just justified what we've done? After all, I just told you this is who they are. We're not wrong. We're just trying to keep the domestic tranquility.
The third and most important syndrome or symptom that probably we all have observed from the black community, and this is family disruption. And you understand, during the Jim Crow system, the roles were changed, and the black man didn't get a job while the black woman got a job. And what did these do to a black man and a black woman? I know you might be asking yourself, you are saying today we are having a lot of dysfunctional families in the black community, dysfunctional marriages in the black community. You're asking yourself question, why is this happening, right? So there's an explanation. You know, the enemy tried so much to destabilize the black family. So when they tried to destabilize the black family, what happened? We had a lot of increased relationship which was strained, increased divorce from people, especially in the black community. And the black men sought to marry other races. Black women also sought to marry other races, you know. So this has led to family disruption in the black families. And also we're seeing this happening today. As you're seeing a lot of passport bros, we're seeing a lot of passport bros leaving Black American sisters or African American sisters to go to marry Latino, to go to marry, you know, Hispanic, go to marry white women, of which you came to understand, like, due to slavery, things like Jim Crow happened, things like mass incarceration happened, which contributed to these cycles of poverty. The real role of a man was stripped down, and the real role of a man was given to the woman. And look how we are trying to deal with this. And it's happening even today in the black family. This is something which is really, really happening, and it's so prevalent, and it's so important that we all need to get to talk about this because it's something which is really, really important. You understand? So, single parent households and straight family dynamics. Family dynamics, as I explained, is the exchange of roles. Now, men are taking the role of women, women are taking the role of men. So, this is something which keeps on happening, right? So, as a social science student, how am I seeing this video? What can I mean, what are the checkouts of this video, right? So, as a social science student and also a person who studied African American literature, African American sociology, this is not way something new to me. Now, listen, from a social science standpoint, post-traumatic slave syndrome is understood as a form of intergenerational trauma, where trauma is passed down from one generation to the next through behaviors, cultural norms, and environmental factors. Studies have shown that children of parents or grandparents who experience trauma, whether from war, genocide, or slavery, can develop emotional, psychological, and even physical symptoms associated with that trauma. You understand why we are having violence and aggression from our communities, right? So this explains it so much. This is from a social science perspective, or as a social science student looking into this, right? So the process is being explained by three processes. One is epigenetics, and I've talked about it in the beginning of the video. I'll just continue the presentation just to make sure that we are on the right tabs. Now, epigenetics, this is the first process, and from the word genetics, right? So research indicates that trauma can leave a biological imprint on genes, potentially affecting how descendants of the trauma survive or respond to the stress and adversity. Now, that's the one thing, or one processes from a social perspective, that explains how intergenerational trauma works. We also have cultural transmission as our talking point. Traumatic experiences affect how parents socialize their children, shaping behavior, values, and coping mechanism. And this is true. Most of us black families, we teach our children to know that to know that the society that we are in is so crucial, and this is shaping how we raise our children. And if you want to know that this is true, look at children who are raised on the white families. Their parents doesn't focus so much on slavery, or doesn't focus so much on systemic issues, because this doesn't affect them directly as it affects black people. So you realize how there is it's a trauma which affects even how the family or the black family sensitize their children in regards to things which they experience, or they experienced as people, just to know them that the environment or the society that we're living, it's not safe, or it's not just literally okay for everybody, right? So I'm also going to be talking about, as my third process, I'm also going to be talking about socioeconomic factors. Historical trauma also feeds into systemic issues like poverty, limited access to quality education, and disenfranchisement, perpetuating circle of disadvantage, as I'm going to talk about, right? So I've talked about important things, and just example, instances of post-traumatic syndrome in the black community. Family structure. Slavery disrupted black families through forced separation, which is true. Today, around 65% of black children grow up in single parent household, significantly higher percentage compared to other racial groups in the US, right? So this partly attributed to historical patterns set during slavery, compounded by economic and social challenges in the post-slavery era. I talked about health disparities, right? Just to explain it, the enduring effects of trauma may contribute to chronic stress-related health issues in the black community. For instance, black Americans are disproportionately affected by conditions like hypertension, diabetes, mental health disorder. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services reports that 20% of black adults are more likely to report serious psychological distress compared to their white counterparts, which is true, right? And this shows how it also affects the health disparities between these people. I also talked about education and income disparities. Now, listen, trauma induces behavior such as distrust of institutions and land helplessness may contribute to disparities in education and employment. Black families have a median household income for about 45,870 compared to 74,912 for white families. This affects the historical trauma, which are also seen in the college graduation rate, where about 26% of black Americans earn a college degree compared to 40% of white America. I haven't talked about mass incarceration. I have been talking about this for the longest time. Mass incarceration is another manifestation of unresolved trauma and systemic racism. Although the black Americans make up 13% of the US population, they account for 40% in the prison population. Now you understand the legacy of slavery, including policies like Jim Crow and Riddling, has fed into modern day overpolicing and criminal justice biases. So this was my presentation, and I hope that you get it so informative, so educational. So if you're watching this video for the first time, I'll ask you to subscribe to the channel. I'll ask you to join the membership. I'll ask you to like and share this video so that it can reach people who are like-minded like you. As you listen, this is your presenter Eugene Duck Stories, and until then, peace, love, and harmony. Salute.